All right, so next up, let's take a look at the Lady in the Forest. Now, this one's a bit tricky because we need to figure out what kind of tool we'd want to use while masking. So we have, Photoshop has a ridiculous number of tools for separating one thing from another. It has ways of separating things based off of the focus, but the focus just meaning whether or not something is blurry as compared to not blurry. However, the background and the foreground element are, for the most part, in focus around the legs. Photoshop has ways of selecting things based on color. However, the color of the legs and the color of these sticks are approximately the same. Photoshop has ways of selecting things based off of contrast. However, we have the issue of the shadow of the leg matching up with the rest of the object. Photoshop has ways of selecting things based off of common objects such as people. However, this person is cut in half, meaning that it won't register correctly when selected as a person. Photoshop has ways of selecting things based off of edges, such as with the magnetic lasso tool. But if we were to go in here and start using the magnetic lasso tool on these parts, we'll notice that the edge detection starts to have some problems for the reasons that I was just discussing. It's essentially trying to detect things based off of parameters that are just too similar. So we could do specialized adjustments with that, where if it starts bumping out too far and it adds a point that we don't want, we simply press the backspace key on the PC keyboard to remove those points, and then we go back and we click. We could hit the caps lock key to view the threshold size that is being selected, and we can use the brackets left and right, left to make it smaller, right to make it larger, to pick up more or less of the surrounding area to sample with. Turn caps locks off so we don't see it. As you can see, a larger area will cause those bumps to fly out even further as it's going. But none of these are very viable solutions in this case. Everything would take a very long time going in. For this particular object, what I would actually use is a pen tool selection. However, the pen tool is something that we're going to cover later in the semester, so we're not going to use that either. If you have these tools, if you already know these tools and you're like, yeah, the pen tool would be absolutely perfect for this, why doesn't he just use the pen tool? Feel free to use the pen tool. Use anything you want for this assignment, whatever tools are available, that's absolutely fine. We're just going to instead explore a little bit and see what the best way to go through this would be. In my case, I'm going to take a look at this. Really, the issue has to do with how the shadow and the highlight makes this a very high contrast in two opposite directions situation, which causes a lot of difficulties with the selection. So let's explore some ways that we can go about that. Honestly, the pen tool would be the easiest way. Just click a few times and boom, you're done. And if you know the pen tool, go for it. Otherwise, just follow along and we'll just test a whole bunch of tools and see which one happens to work best. So I'm going to take a look at the channels and see which ones have the higher contrast where. And what I'm going to see if I can do is actually mask out the legs in parts. So I can target, for example, the higher contrast areas and then later the lower contrast, and then just combine the two. That may be the second most efficient way after the pen tool in this case. So there are ways to combine masks together. You can, of course, shift click with the masks since they're selections. That will allow you to go through, as I've demonstrated earlier. There are also other functions. Maybe we'll explore some of those as we slog through this. So let's take a look. Before we get going, let's have a quick look at three of the most important layer blending modes that you'll encounter when working in Photoshop. That being multiply, the reverse of multiply, which I always get wrong. I believe it is screen. Yes, it is screen, and overlay. And let's see how those function real fast. That will make this whole process a lot easier. Later in the semester, we're going to go over all of the blending modes, but for now, let's just cover three of them. I'm going to just open up a quick demonstration I have called overlay. And you can see that I have a series of squares, and these squares are, if I open up my color picker, these are pure black, 000 all across the board. Pure gray, you can see it's got a 50% brightness or 128 across the RGB. And pure white, if we click on that, you can see that we have 100% brightness or 255, the highest value in red, green, and blue. We'll go ahead and tell that okay. And you can see that we have a color, and this is just a happily selected blue in here that I just picked and filled it with. This could honestly be any color, it doesn't matter. So let's take a look at those 3 blending modes, and then we will advance a little bit further. So with the 3 squares selected, I'm going to come over to our different modes, so you can see mousing over it. We'll do all kinds of fascinating combinations. But the 3 I'm interested in are multiply. And if I click on multiply, you can see that the black is left alone, the white is dropped out, and the gray makes things darker. This is a classic mode for illustrators to use with traditional mediums. If they have inked something with black ink on white paper, scanned it in, multiply will, bam, knock out all of the whites, leave the blacks completely alone, and then they're ready to roll. Threshold works very well with that too. We'll cover that a little bit later throughout the semester. Next up, we have the opposite of multiply. So if these are the darkening areas, following that are lightening. And 1, 2 down is multiply and the darkening. And I know it's the darkening because the top 2 are the normal. The next few are darken. And then there's this dividing line. We've got the lighten, dividing line. We have the overlays. We'll talk about that later in the semester as well. But the opposite of multiply, 1, 2, is screen. If I select that, you notice that it's doing the opposite now. White is left alone. Black is knocked out, and the gray is making the color below it lighter. And it will go across all the channels. Everything becomes lighter going on. Last but not least, we have overlay, which is fascinating. Overlay knocks out the gray, the pure gray, but anything darker than gray will darken whatever's below it. Anything lighter than gray will lighten what is below it. So the reason that this is important is that these modes don't just exist in your layers. These modes also exist in your brushes. So if you were to go into the brush, be on your keyboard, you can see that the mode's normally set to normal, normally normal, but it also has the same blending modes that are available to you under the layers palette. So this is useful when building masks because of things like overlay. Overlay will make things lighter or darker, and it's useful because of things like screen. Screen will leave white alone, but screen will brighten things up, but it will ignore the black, and then multiply will ignore the white, knock the white out, and darken things out. So let's take a look at that and see how that goes. I think I said all 3 of those right. We'll find out as we go. So let's just pick one of these real quick so that I can demonstrate that. Here is the green channel. Let's duplicate that for just a moment. So we have a duplicate of the green channel. If we were to get the brush and set this to, and I had caps locks on, so I have this crosshair, so I'll turn that off so I get the actual size of the brush. If we set this brush to the normal mode and paint with white, it does exactly what you would expect. It paints with white. You can see that it's a fairly soft brush, so it's putting a soft edge. If we press X on the keyboard to flip that around, we get black. It paints with black. No surprises there. However, if we were to go into overlay mode, things will be treated differently. Black will now darken things, whereas white will lighten things. And if we were to switch it to multiply mode, white will do nothing because, as we saw, it ignores it. Black will just immediately darken absolutely everything. If we switch it to screen mode, then black will do nothing. Flip that around. White will just knock this out of the park. It's pure white. So on screen and multiply, generally you'll want to actually use something darker than black or white, or lighter in the case of multiply, darker in the case of screen, so that you don't blow things out and clip, so that you only see white. And we'll explain more about clipping. I'll explain more about clipping later. Essentially, it means that you've gone past any useful data and everything's just blown out to a single bright color. So let's see if any of that is useful on any of our channels. We've got blue, we've got green, which we copied, and we've got red. Red might actually be a good case. Go ahead and kill the green copy, instead duplicate the red. Let's go ahead and switch this mode to a quick overlay. Don't forget to set your paint mode back to normal when you're done. Otherwise, you'll be confused later when you're trying to get stuff done. And look at that. We can come in and we can start erasing away the background. and mostly leave the leg alone depending on how bright things are. Now, I'm not going to use the soft edge in this case. I'm going to use a hard edge. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, Option on Mac, and just go down to get a nice hard brush. I do love using the right mouse key with the Alt key. So again, not the left like you normally click, but the right one, the opposite one, because left and right will let you actually see how big the brush is, and up and down will actually let you see how fuzzy things are. I think it's just an absolutely great tool. Okay, so let's do this. Let's do this a little more carefully. I'm going to knock this down to about 30%. That's just up here on the opacity, 3 on the top of the keyboard, not on the number pad, but on the top of the keyboard. We'll put it to 30. And I can just kind of come in. I don't like how that's going. So essentially, this is just a really, really, really difficult piece to work on. The colors are similar. Everything's about similar. I honestly would just use the pen tool, but we haven't covered that yet. So after this exploration, instead, at least it was useful saying how the overlay works. Let's touch up the overlay a little bit in the dress. We'll just make these things white. And I'm going to do that not at 30%, but 100%. And so notice that it's making the lightest areas very white, but it's not really affecting the darks as much, which is pretty cool. So it gives us some leeway as we paint through. Again, maybe not the best tool, but I did want to tell you guys about this stuff going in. So just quickly start editing the dress a little bit. And this will work pretty nicely up in the arm, but I'm not going to use that tool here. In that case, I'm just going to quickly paint in white. So really, I could have just done a normal brush in this case. I'm just doing this in case I accidentally slide somewhere I don't want to. By this, I mean overlay. So that if I slide somewhere I don't want to, I have a little more leeway. It's a little bit safer for me. I won't have to undo the entire brush stroke. I can just go back in and massage the data a little bit. So just come in. But this isn't really going to matter in a minute. Just to give you an idea of how the overlay works with white. Pretty cool. We can also darken things up if we flip it over to black. If we were to paint right here, notice that it's leaving this line fairly delineated. And if we were on a pure or white area, it would also leave it alone a little bit better. It's pretty neat. Again, this one has so many grays. It's just really, really tricky one to paint. So what would I do in this case if I didn't know how the pen tool works yet? And again, this is exactly perfect for the pen tool. Well, instead, I'd use the second best option, which would be not the magnetic lasso tool, which has all the great commands. Again, the caps lock key lets you see how much it's picking up. So you could go in and turn on caps locks for a second. Sorry, hit tab, turn on caps locks for a second, and reduce that a whole lot so it's not sampling a lot. Turn off caps locks just so I can see where I'm clicking. See that it can kind of pick it up, but it's a little wobblier than I would like. It's doing its hardest. It's trying. Boy, howdy is it trying. I'm just clicking to lay down a point. It's actually doing really well up in the dress, but that I'm not too surprised about that. The problem area is really the legs. So if I were to go in, just double click to close that, fill it with an Alt Delete to get the foreground color of white, Control D to deselect. Did an okay job cutting that out, but you can see by the time I get down here, oh, it's actually, the really small brush is really good on this nice edge. Very cool. Man, I love it when something works. But in the leg, if you cut out a little bit, now it's actually doing really well. So I'm just going to hit backspace a couple of times to get rid of those points. It's holding in. There we go. So that's about the point that's going to start failing. So backspace key, just get rid of that. So I'm going to come out. Whoa. I'm going to watch Windows 10 freak out. Not a problem. Backspace key a few times. Thank you, backspace key. So it's always possible to salvage these things when it goes through the use of the backspace key. All right, going to fill that with white. Control D select. Okay, So it's starting to have problems there. So like I was saying, the second best tool is not the magnetic lasso tool. It's actually the polygon tool, as long as you don't have a curve. We just have these edges. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, zoom in. I'm going to grab my polygon lasso tool and then just click, click, click away, using my human eyes to figure out where the line is. And once we get the hard to edit spots, we can continue along our lives without any difficulty and just get the rest of it using things like the magnetic lasso tool, the color range tool if we wanted, which is pretty useful in this mode because color range will just get grays. If you don't remember color range, don't worry about that. We're going to touch on that as well later in the semester. It's a pretty powerful tool, and there's always more to learn throughout the Photoshop experience. So what I'm just going to do here is go around the entire legs with the magnetic lasso tool very, very slowly, just clicking. And then when I've gone on for a while and I'm afraid I'm going to mess up, I'm just going to pull out, double click to get a chunk of it, and Alt Delete to fill it with white. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to click, click, click away. And then pull out. Notice that every time I continue where I'm going from, Alt Delete, Control D to deselect, I go back a little bit into the white area just so that I can overlap it easily. So that's all I'm going to be doing for the legs. So I'm going to use some movie magic to skip ahead so you don't have to watch me do this for the next 15 minutes. So real quick, movie magic. All right, pretty cool, right? Here we have the legs carefully cut out, and by cut out I mean I'm just on my mask, filling it with white, and if I mess up I do some black, and that's just using lasso tool. I left alone the areas in the feet themselves because we have a couple of things we need to discuss. She's in the grass, so how much of the grass do you want to bring along with you? And the answer to that in my case is I'm going to want to have some grass brought in. I'm just going to blur it so that it can be smudged in. So the way that I would do that is actually with the brush tool. And I'm just going to right click real quick. I'm going to make the hardness very low, and I'm going to bring up the size. Whoa. And then I'm just going to paint in here. I'm not liking that size. So again, Alt key and then right click and drag. Here we go. I do love that trick. Let's see. All right. About that soft, and let's say about that big. All right. And so we can see about where it is. So I'm just going to bring it into the grass a little bit in this area, so that I'll make sure that I have these grass pieces. I look at the color image real quick, turn off the mask there, and whoops. That'll give me an idea of what's going in. I'm going to go ahead and brush right in there, so turn that back on, and make sure that I've got white, otherwise I'm not going to paint anything in. There we go. Just bring in essentially some grass. I'm going to now have it even softer and fuzzier, so I'm going to increase the size, and decrease the hardness. So I could just get a little bit of the grass down here. Now I want to not mess up the foot, so now's a good time to go back to the lasso tool again. Just real quick, click, 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 click. All right, so get a big swath down here, and then not really any over here. Just carefully select around the edge of the foot there. All right, so why am I doing this? Well, this will allow me to retain the hard edges within the selection and use the brush for the soft edges. Let me show you what I mean by that. Now switch over to the brush. And so because this has a hard edge, I'm essentially using the mask, the selection as a sort of mask just for painting. And I can use some soft blended edges in there. And then I can't accidentally create a soft edge over there. All right, I'm going to shrink this down, left bracket key, boop, 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 shrink it down a little more, doop, doop, doop. All right. All right, I'm liking that okay. Now remember, for this project, you're going to knock the image down to 100 and 50 pixels per inch. So the mask doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to be grading on the mask. So you do want to concentrate on having a really good mask. But if you have a few small imperfections, probably won't knock you down too much. It's better to get stuff in on time than it is to get something in late that's absolutely perfect, because you lose more points for being late than you do for having something suboptimal. Let me turn off the RGB and take a look at this. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Look at those legs. There's an error in the feet. Let me go ahead and go in with my brush tool again. This time I'm going to bring this up to hardness 100. I just right-clicked to do that. Still got white selected. Just going to increase the bracket size a little bit. Boom, get rid of this little bit of junk that's floating around in there. I'm going to X out, X. I'm going to, with the brush key, I'm going to hit X to get the black, and left drag with the Alt key to get a nice soft brush. So you touch up this area just a little bit. So it's a little softer. All right. All right. So this is looking pretty good. And you can paint in black anywhere you want it. Looks like I don't actually have black. D for default, X. There we go. That'll do it. On your once I record it, your guys' monitors might pick it up as black. Just got to bring the hardness back up to 100% up here. So you can see there's a million ways to do anything in Photoshop. All right. So what we want to do is now darken in this area while leaving this these legs alone. Now it's time to hit multiply. And now, sorry, overlay. Don't know why I said multiply. Overlay. So now everything gets darker except the white is left alone. And it's getting darker because I have it set to, boom, black. So now I can paint in here without having to worry about anything. And if I just do it a second, third, or fourth time, it gets darker, darker, darker. So look at that, because I took the time to make a very careful selection and then fill it with white. That lets me, with the overlay mode on the brush and the black as the main piece, just paint that right in. Now, I do have to be careful in the fuzzy area here, because if I go through, it will create a hard edge immediately. Those grays are what makes it fuzzy, so we'll have to handle that a little bit differently. So mostly I'm just coming in here and just darkening it up right around the edges. So we're coming up to the 25-minute mark on this, and I do like to split these videos up under half an hour. It makes it easier for you guys to go back and find things later. So what I'm going to do is save this out, and then we will handle the bit of the dress. I left a little bit alone over here. We can handle this pretty easily just by hitting it up with overlay, and then coming in now with magnetic lasso. And then it should very quickly find the edge between the black and this gray. And if it's having any problems, turn on the caps lock key, crank up the sample, turn off the caps lock key. There we go. Now it's just going to pick that up right away. Look how cool that is. And let me fill that in. Control Delete for the background color. Control D. So I'm just going to repeat that down here. We'll call that the end of this video. We'll move on to the next part of masking this out, which will be as simple as filling in the bits and pieces around and about with black. The only tricky bit, of course, is going to be the feet, where we decided to maintain a blur. Whoops. Control Delete because I've got these colors backwards. The feet, did I say fur? Where we, the blur, so that it merges in. So we'll deal with that chunk separately. We're going to want to preserve that. It's going to get a little bit trickier. So I'll see you in the next video, and we'll finish off masking out the this person. And I think that'll be great. Just a heads up, though, what you can totally do with a normal mode brush, instead of an overlay brush, is just come in and fill that stuff out like real quick. No reason not to. Less for us to do later. You can also do that with the lasso tool. So, all right, I will see you next video, and I'm just going to finish this this little bit off. We'll leave the feet alone. All right, see you in a minute.